everybody. I'm Evie Roberts, and this is my podcast, Talking in the Dark. Welcome. The aim of this podcast is to raise awareness about blindness, visual impairment, and disability in general, in a happy and light-hearted way. For those of you that don't know, I am blind. I was born with a condition called bilateral anophthalmia. Try spelling that one. It basically means that when I was born, my eyes didn't develop properly, so I wear prosthetics instead. The goal of this podcast is to remove some of the stigma and stereotypes around disabilities, whilst also having fun at the same time. Each week, I will be interviewing people from all walks of life, including some with hidden or physical disabilities like mine, and getting to know a little bit more about them and the lives they lead. This week, I am very excited to tell you that I will be talking to best-selling children's author and playwright, Julia Donaldson. My name is Evie Roberts, and this is my podcast, Talking in the Dark. Welcome. Hi Julia, how are you?
Hello, I'm fine. How are you?
I'm really good, thank you. Well, first of all, thank you so much for coming on the podcast. It is genuinely such an honour to meet you. But second of all, how's your day going so far?
Oh gosh, well, I've been for a nice walk, and I've been I'm quite interested in grasses, different grasses, and I kind of know all the wild flowers that grow locally. So I was out with a friend trying to identify all the grasses, because there's so many different kinds of grasses. I'm not very good at that yet, but yeah, I love the countryside around where we live, so that's been good.
Oh my gosh, that sounds so fun. I'm guessing by that then that you really like being outdoors and being in nature.
Yes, I do. I mean, perhaps ironically, because I grew up in London, for me, the countryside was like kind of fairyland. It was this place in those days, not many people had cars, and it was quite hard to get out of London. And, when I did get out of London for summer holidays, I was just amazed by the beauty of the charming villages and the hedgerows and, the flowers and so on. Yeah.
Yeah. Do you prefer the city or the country, or do you like them both equally?
Well, I'm quite fortunate in a way, because I live in a quite busy, bustly village with very accessible countryside. But we used to live in Scotland, and we kept a flat in Edinburgh. So if I get tired of the low ceilings and everyone knowing you, I can escape to Edinburgh, where there's high ceilings and no one knows me.
Oh, that's good. Well, before we begin properly, Julia, I just have to say that I absolutely adored your books when I was younger. My mum used to read them to me as bedtime stories when I was really, really little. And then she bought me a collection of the audiobooks, and let's just say they were very well used. I absolutely loved them. I loved that a lot of them had sort of little songs at the end. I loved all the sound effects. And since then, those audiobooks have also been passed on to another child who was born with a visual impairment as well. But I mean, I absolutely adored your books. So to begin with, can you tell me a little bit about your childhood and any sort of books or poems that influenced or left an impression on you at an early age?
Yes. Well, first, let me say, it's lovely for me to hear that you enjoyed my books without being able to see the pictures, because although I do love the illustrations in my books, I feel they should also just stand on their own as, the sounds of them really is what I'm after, and the words that flow and so on. So that's very encouraging to me. And I think, yeah, as a child, just to answer your question, I did love poetry in particular. And when I was 5 years old, my father gave me a book. It was a very big, fat book with a navy blue cover, and it's called The Book of 1,000 Poems. And yeah, so I still got that book. It says To Julia with love from Daddy. And I learned a lot of those poems off by heart, and I used to go around reciting them. So that was an influential book. There weren't so many picture books around really when I was growing up. There were some, but not nearly as many as there are now. But when I was a little bit older, I loved things like the William. I don't know. Have you read any of the William books about this boy called William? There's tapes. There's very good audios of them as well. And he's 11. He's always 11 in all the books. He never gets any older than 11. He's always getting into trouble, but he's not really a bad boy, but he just has all these ambitious ideas and tries to carry them out, and they always go wrong. So I love those books. Yeah, and I loved there's an author called Inez Bit. She I think people that know her best for her book called The Railway Children nowadays, because there's a film made of this. But she wrote lots of books, and kind of often there's a little mixture of realism and magic. So there'd be just ordinary children who would squabble and their shoelaces would come undone and all the rest of it. But there'd be one magic thing, like a creature who could grant them wishes, or a ring that could make them invisible. So I liked that mixture. It wasn't too fantastical, but just one element of fantasy. Yeah, that's just a few, but there's so many stories that I loved as a child.
Yeah, absolutely. So I'm guessing by that, did you read a lot when you were younger? As a child, was reading something that you were really passionate about?
Yes, I loved books, and of course there weren't so many other distractions then. I mean, we didn't have a television, I don't think, till I was about, I don't know, maybe even in my teens. My granny had a television. She lived upstairs from us, and we'd go up, occasionally to watch something on there. But children's television was only 1 hour every day. It wasn't like nowadays. So yes, so reading was the main entertainment really, and yes, I loved books, and I was lucky enough to have a really good library near where I lived, and some second-hand bookshops. And I loved spending my pocket money in these second-hand bookshops. And I had a friend who loved reading too, and we would buy books and swap them and so on. And we like writing as well. This friend of mine and I think the reading influenced us to write our own stories. So without having been such an avid reader, I wouldn't be a writer today.
Yeah, I can totally imagine. What do you think you love about books?
I think it's just that being transported into a different world, and into a different mind, into the mind of the character we're reading about, and in a sense into the mind of the author. And I think a book can do that really, really better than anything. Of course, a film and a play can do that as well, but with a book, you can follow the thoughts of the character, better than you can in any of those other media.
Yeah, absolutely. So I know that before you sort of started writing children's books, you wrote and performed songs and plays as well. And you also did some busking around Europe. So can you tell me a bit about that?
Yeah, well, there's kind of two strands to that, really. I'll maybe start with the busking, because when I was at university, I was doing a course. It was drama and French, so those were the two subjects. And for part of my course, I went to Paris for 6 months, and it was quite expensive living in Paris and studying there. And so I started busking with a girlfriend who did the same course as me. And we went to all the cafes in the Champs-Élysées in Paris, the pavement cafes, and we'd sing sort of nice songs like Green Sleeves and Blowing in the Wind. We could only play a few chords on our guitars. But then a great friend of ours called Malcolm came out to join us, and he was a medical student, and he knew chords to hundreds of songs, and so our repertoire dramatically increased. And So when eventually I got back to Bristol, where I was studying, I really missed the busking. And Malcolm and I, who was by that stage, he was my boyfriend, we started sort of singing at gigs. You know, we'd sing at a student ball or something like that. I remember we sang at a dinner for dentists, and I started writing songs to fit the occasion. So when we were singing to this dentist, I wrote a song about teeth. And then, because I'd written a lot of songs, I decided to send a tape of songs to the BBC, and that's how I started writing songs for children's television programs like Play School and Play Away, Play Days, and so on. And that in turn led to my first book, because my first book, Squash and Squeeze, the words of it were actually one of those songs I wrote for television. And Malcolm and I also used to sing songs in folk clubs, and I would write songs sometimes just about what was going on in the world, or sometimes just whimsical songs. I wrote one song about the snails in our garden, and there's another one about the London to Brighton vintage car race. Yes, I was really, I was a songwriter. I considered myself a songwriter and perhaps a playwright as well, really, till I was in my 40s. I hadn't had any books published till I was in my 40s.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. So obviously, I can see that writing is a huge part of your life for you. Do you consider writing as like as a kind of escape?
Um, I don't think so, not in the same way as reading is. I think reading's an escape. Not a cowardly escape, but it's just like going somewhere else, like going on holiday. But writing, it's very hard work, actually. It's not just, oh, I think I'll escape from real life and go into this fantasy world of writing. No, there's a lot of blood, sweat, and tears involved, really.
Yeah, yeah, I can definitely imagine that. Um, so you've kind of mentioned that you went on to write songs for children's TV shows like Play Away and Play
Yes.
School, and you've kind of mentioned that then sort of led to your first book being published, A Squash and a Squeeze. But how did that timeline kind of work? Was it that you got approached to sort of make it into a book? How did that work?
Yeah, well, what happened was I'd written lots of songs for lots of children's television programs, just on and off, and that's kind of what I did. But that was rather fading from my life because of modern technology and the way that the programs are working. They weren't commissioning people like me so much to write songs, so I was a bit kind of upset about that. And that was dying out a bit. But then luckily, just out of the blue, I got this phone call from someone who'd got my number via the BBC. And this person was an editor from a publishing house. And she had heard my song, A Squash and a Squeeze. I think she'd heard it on a tape in her car when her children were little. And she was now working for a publisher, and she was trying to think of good picture book storylines. And she just thought that that story, the words of A Squash and a Squeeze in my song, would be good for a picture book. So yes, so she phoned me and asked my permission, and I kind of tried to act very cool and as if this happened to me every day. I sort of said, yes, well, I'd have to look at the small print, of course. Yes, I'd have to have a contract. I'll think about it, sort of thing. And then I put the phone down and I was kind of dancing around the room because, of course, by this stage I had children and I'd read lots of picture books to my children, and we'd made tapes of stories for them, and we knew what a lot it meant to them. So it was brilliant the way my life kind of expanded after that. But I mean, it didn't happen straight away. Squash and Squeeze was published, and that led then to me being bold enough to send some little plays I'd written for my son's primary school and stuff like that. I sent them to an educational publisher, and I think I had 17 educational books, short retellings of folk tales and simple plays published before the Gruffalo, in between the Squash and Squeeze and the Gruffalo, which was my second kind of bookshop book, if you like, or trade book, we call them.
Right, yeah, okay. I was just wondering as you were sort of telling me about that, if you hadn't have received that phone call, do you think that writing children's books would have been something that you would have
Oh,
gone on to do, or do you think it
sounds like
sparked
a
it?
question. That's a really, I don't think I've ever been asked that question, that exact question.
Oh,
I don't think I necessarily would have, because it's actually been very kind of organic, in a way I've followed, I've taken up opportunities that were presented to me, and maybe if that opportunity hadn't been presented, who knows, I might not have thought of it, because of course I was so keen on the songwriting. And maybe I'd have gone down a different route and started writing more musicals, because I did actually, when I was in my 20s, I wrote 2 musicals for children, to be acted by adults, but for children. And we put them on. Malcolm and I and some actor friends performed these musicals. So maybe I'd have gone down that route, but um, I I don't think there's much point in speculating what might have happened,
mhm.
really. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, where do you sort of get the inspiration for the books that you write?
Well, when a child asks that, if I'm visiting a school and someone asks that, and I've probably got my books out kind of on display, so I would then say, choose one of the books and ask me how I got the idea for that one. So perhaps I should ask you that, if you ask me about a specific book, because it's just different for every book, really.
Okay then, let's go with the Gruffalo.
Okay, the Gruffalo. Um, yeah, that's slightly complicated, because I told you that I wrote quite a few educational books, plays, and I was asked to write some short, very short plays for about 4 or 6 children, based on traditional tales. And I did that, I did a lot of research, found a lot of traditional tales around the world, and including one about a girl who managed to scare away a tiger. And I was going to do that, turn that one into a play. And then I thought, no, that's such a good story. I think I could develop that perhaps as a picture book. Um, so I did some other plays, and I kept that idea up my sleeve. And then I thought, yeah, rather than having it about a girl and a tiger, perhaps I'll have it about a mouse and a tiger. And the mouse can trick the tiger. Then I couldn't get anything to rhyme with tiger. And so I remember saying to Malcolm, perhaps I should make up an imaginary beast that anything could rhyme with, Do you think I should do that instead of having a tiger? Malcolm said, no, have the tiger. So I just disregarded that totally and invented the Gruffalo. And the story just sprang, then the story got more and more complicated. The whole thing of the mouse making up the Gruffalo, that wasn't in the original traditional tale. But I think the traditional tale was a Chinese story, but you come across different versions of it all around the world.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. That's really fascinating, actually. The fact that it still has some ties to this traditional tale, but the fact that you've kind of taken it and made it your own in a way.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's really how stories have been passed down through generations. It's not that people invent something entirely new. People just change existing stories. And music's quite like that. A lot of, classical composers, they would adapt, say popular dance tunes and so on. So, I've never claimed that I'm totally original. I like to think some of my stories are more original than others, but I do think traditional tales can be a really good source for people who want to write. Are you a writer yourself? If you do like writing stories,
I love writing stories. I'm definitely they say, don't they, that you're either good at maths or English. Um, I am definitely better at English. I absolutely love creative writing. Like in primary school, if they were like, okay, write okay, write a story about this, I was in my element. I absolutely loved it, and I still do. I think a lot of that stems from the fact that my mum always used to read me a bedtime story when I was younger,
Yeah.
every single night without fail, and if we didn't have a book to hand, she'd make a story up. Um, and I think that because, literature and things like that was such a big part of my life from an early age, that led on to me being able to creative write very well. Same with music as well. My mum used to always play music in the car, partly because she likes it. Also, it was very good for me as a visually impaired person to get that sort of auditory stimulation as well. And I really love music now as well.
And do you think perhaps because you couldn't see, I know that a lot of books don't have pictures, but the books for young children usually do. Do you think that because your mother was telling you these stories, maybe that, your imagination was stronger than someone who could see and who's just guided by what they could see on the page?
Possibly, yeah. I think that I always mum always used to say to me, "Oh, you've got such a good imagination." And I would just, I was an only child and I was perfectly happy to just sit and play pretend with a couple of teddies. And so yeah, possibly because because I wasn't guided by what I could see, my imagination was very good. But obviously I think it goes back to what you were saying at the very start of the chat about that your books are picture books. If we take that, for example, I was aware that they were picture books. I was aware that they were sort of illustrated by the incredible Axel Scheffler, but I didn't ever think about the fact that they might have pictures on them. I just thought about the story itself.
Yes, well, I like that because I mean although the pictures are so good, the stories can, for instance, they can be dramatized like we act them out, and then we might have different, the characters might look a bit different from how they look in the book, or some of our props and costumes might be a bit different. So I don't think one wants to feel the story is kind of imprisoned, with illustrate those particular illustrations, however wonderful they are. And of course, I've got other illustrators that you mentioned, Axel Scheffler, but I have written, got a lot of other
Mhm.
read, I had any of the other stories read too, like the ones with um, Lydia Monk's with What the Ladybird Heard and so.
Oh yeah. Hmm.
But
Yeah.
sorry, just going back to you. Can we just go back to you for a moment? Because I'm wondering then, as well as having stories read to you, did you then get, do you read? Do you do Braille? Do you read stories like
Mhm.
that? Yeah.
Yeah, I do. So actually, fun fact, I think it's only about 5% of the blind community that read Braille. Um,
Really?
I am one of those people. One of the big reasons for that is that a lot of people, it's slightly more rare to be born blind. A lot of people who become blind lose their sight over a long period of time. But I was born blind, and so my only way into being able to read and write was with Braille.
Mm.
Um, so yeah, I started learning Braille when I was 2 or 3, I
Mm.
think. I was
Gosh.
very, very little because basically you had to get the basics in as quickly as possible, really. And yeah, I had loads and loads of Braille books when I was younger. And so I think that did help as well. And actually, I used to have a Braille copy of the Gruffalo that
Mm.
my vision support teacher had done for me. And I've also got quite a good memory, and I used to be able to recite word for word the story of the Gruffalo without looking at the Braille.
Yes, yes, yes. And I've got a Braille copy of it as well, and I sometimes take that to schools, and I ask children to come up and close their eyes and tell me what they can feel on the page, and we talk about that. But I didn't realize such a small percentage of the blind community could you read Braille, but I have heard, I don't know if this is true, that only a small percentage of books are available sort of in Braille. So that
Mhm.
But are most books available as audio versions, or is that just a small percentage of books as well?
Yeah, so lots and lots of books are available as audio versions, which is brilliant. I always, but not every book is available as an audiobook as yet, and I think that that's something that would be, brilliant to eventually achieve. But you are very much correct about there is a very small percentage of books that are available in Braille.
Yeah, I mean, it's like just going to a bookcase and trying to pull out a book that catches your fancy, and oh, it's stuck. It won't come out. It's not a real
Yeah.
book, you know. I actually had to record a story once for I think it was the RNIB, for blind listeners. And the story I recorded was called Freddie and the Fairy. And it's about an annoying little boy who mumbles all the time. And the fairy is hard of hearing to, has hearing aids. And because she can't hear him properly because he's mumbling, she gets all his wishes a bit wrong. But in the end, the boy learns to speak better, and she kind of plays a trick on him. And so when he has said he wants a caterpillar, she magics him up a gorilla instead. And actually, she's heard caterpillar. She's just kind of playing a trick. But in the words of my book, it didn't say gorilla or caterpillar. It just said now, now he speaks quite clearly, and everything he wishes for comes true, or very nearly. And then you had to look at the page and see, oh, oops, he's wished for a caterpillar and he's actually getting a gorilla. So that wasn't in the words. So I thought, how can I record this for blind children? And I thought I could just say, oh, in the picture it shows this. I thought that wouldn't be very good. So when I was waiting, I was in the waiting to record the story, and I thought of a different ending. And so I changed it to a cat, a dog, a mouse, a bird, a thing, caterpillar. The fairy laughed and conjured up a supersized gorilla. So I then, had this new version which blind children would understand. And in fact, we've changed the book now. The new editions of the book have those words instead of the original ones.
Oh, that is brilliant that you were. Yeah, I think the way you did that is a really good way of doing it. So it would still make sense, it's still rhymed instead of sort of describing just what
Yeah.
the picture looked like. I think that
Mm.
was a really brilliant way of doing it because you wouldn't know if you were listening to that and you hadn't read the original version it was any different. So I think that's a really a really good way of doing it. Um Now obviously, the Gruffalo, it's a very well-known book, isn't it? But do you sometimes find it can sort of overshadow some of the other brilliant books you've written over the years?
Yeah, well, I mean, there's always that danger, isn't there? I mean, I expect lots of authors have felt like that. I'm sure probably A.A. Milne felt he'd written a lot of books as well as Winnie the Pooh, and that's the only one anyone ever would talk about. So there's a little bit of that. But then I have to say to myself, were it not for the Gruffalo, I probably wouldn't, and this the huge success of the Gruffalo, I probably wouldn't have been given the chance to do some of the to experiment in some other areas. So I have, I've had my songs published, I've had some of my poems published, I've written a novel for teenagers. I've been kind of allowed to experiment. And even though I kind of come back, I think what I'm probably best at is the picture books. But, I think probably people would have hesitated to let me branch out into these other areas, which are a bit riskier, were it not for the Gruffalo. So I kind of try to think of the Gruffalo as a sort of big bouncy trampoline that I can bounce some of my other stories and ideas about on.
Yeah, absolutely. I can totally imagine that. It's sort of finding that balance between that being probably what you're best known for, but also that giving you the opportunity to get to create so many other incredible stories. Which, speaking of, some of your books have been turned into animations for TV with, very well known actors narrating the characters. So, how was that experience for you?
And it's a great experience because it's such a good film company that does that. I mean, I would hate it if they just mucked about with my stories and changed the words or whatever. They're very faithful to the stories, and they're actually faithful to the look, of them as well. So I think Axel is pleased as well. Yeah, and they do consult me through the course. They'll show me the original script, and originally I wrote some scripts and to show them the kind of thing that would be acceptable to me and what might not, so they knew kind of how far they could go. When you mention the actors, of course it's great to have some famous actors, but to me that's not the main thing, because I'm sure really there's probably a lot of not very famous actors that could also do brilliant voices as well, but they have to kind of have the famous ones as a draw, so that the people people will watch the films, and the films will be and can be entered for competitions and things like that. So yeah, I'm not going to diss the famous actors, but to me that's not the main thing.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I totally understand that. But no, they are very, very good, little animations, like you said. And actually, I was watching them back for the first time in years, recently, just kind of doing a little bit of research about you, refreshing my memory, things like that. And one of the things I noticed is that the audio description on them is really, really good.
Oh, that's interesting. Right, I've not, because I actually, because I'm hard of hearing, often have, I always actually have subtitles on when I watch television, um, but I don't have the audio description because, yeah, that's more if you can't see, isn't it? It tells you, or is it? I'm getting a bit confused. Can you just refresh my memory about what audio description is?
Of course I can. So, audio description is used when there is a segment of a movie or TV show that doesn't involve characters talking. So, that may be when characters are sort of performing a certain movement or whatever, and the audio description will narrate what's going on the screen, so that people who are visually impaired have some idea of what's going on.
Yes, of course. So audio description, of course, is people who are visually impaired, and the subtitles are people who are audit, whatever the word is. Yeah,
Yeah,
they
yeah,
don't hear so
yeah,
well.
yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yes,
Yeah,
I
no.
wouldn't have come across that, but
Mhm.
that's interesting. So you thought they were particularly good, better than for some other programs, and
Yeah, they were very good, and I mean, not all, programs have audio description.
that's it.
Um, it's definitely gotten a lot better over the years, but not all programs do, whereas all the programs that are based off of your stories do have audio
So
description.
that's really good, isn't it? Yeah. I
Yeah.
must say the same is true with subtitles. They've got a lot better over the years. It used to be quite rare to have subtitles, and now it's normal. So that's a big improvement.
Yeah, definitely. I think that things like that, I think they've definitely gotten better over the years. I think, though, that there is probably still a bit more work to be done until it's, like, completely sort of, like, integrated.
Yes, I'm sure.
Now, I know that you also often perform your books at festivals and theatres. What would you say you enjoy about performing?
Not just the performing. It's I do enjoy performing, because part of me is a frustrated actress. But I like the teamwork because it's not just me. My husband Malcolm, who plays the guitar really well. He's in the shows. Sometimes family members, but we have two professional actors that often act with us. Um, and it, also, it's just fun and quite creative thinking about how to adapt a particular story. So recently we did one just in our local festival, and we had a dog on the stage. The book was called Hospital Dog, and we just thought it'd be so great if we could get a real dog to act the hospital dog. Malcolm actually found this dog with his owner in our local post office and said, "Would you like to be in this show?" And the dog was amazing. The dog was very calm, and we had children on the stage as well. It was just quite exhilarating when you do a new story for the first time anyway. And I suppose the other thing I like about it is it's a big contrast to sitting writing, because obviously when you're just writing, that's a very solitary experience. And with the festivals and theatres, it's very gregarious. And then afterwards, I'll always do a signing and meet members of the audience and so on. So it's just a good kind of balance.
Yeah, I can definitely imagine that. It's almost like it's nice to see your stories being brought to life and shared with an audience, shared with that group of people. I can imagine that that's a really nice feeling.
Yeah, and also to think what's special about the shows that I do based on my books compared with there are professional theatre shows, but in the professional theatre shows, they would just take one story, usually just take one story like Stickman or Zog or What the Ladybird Heard. Whereas in the shows that I do, there's always 7 items in 1 hour, because the stories, as you know, they only take about 5 to 10 minutes to read aloud. So we don't pad them out with extra dialogue and songs. We include songs in the show because I write songs, but we don't insert a song into the middle of a story. So I think that's nice. It makes it more compact, and you don't lose the momentum of each story.
Yeah, I completely understand that. Now I believe that you were diagnosed with cookie bite hearing loss in your 30s. So would you mind telling me a little bit about that condition?
Well, actually, although first of all, I'll say you mentioned cookie bite hearing loss. Well, that is, if you imagine a curve, like as if someone's taken a bite into a biscuit, a cookie. So it's higher at the end of the curve and dips down. That sort of hearing loss is when your hearing isn't so bad at the low and the higher frequencies, but is worse in the middle frequencies, which is where most of the speech, consonants lie. That is quite unusual. Usually it's the high frequencies that fall off, or sometimes the low frequencies. So initially, when I realized I wasn't hearing so well, that's what the curve looked like. And yeah, I was in my 30s. But actually, over the years, it's not that type of hearing loss, particularly. It's just, I just don't hear anything quite so well. But luckily, hearing aids are so good. I mean, I'm hearing you, and that's thanks to, how good modern hearing aids are. I also go to lip reading classes, and I really enjoy them. It's a lovely group. The teacher is like a stand-up comedian. She's brilliant. So I get by, but it is, it's often frustrating if you're, for instance, I'm in a book group, and if we're in someone's sitting room, depending where it is, we take turns to have it in our houses. And, if one sofa is very far from another sofa and someone has a very quiet voice, I might not follow everything that's being said, and that's frustrating. Or if I'm in a very noisy restaurant, the background noise will be very loud for me, and it's difficult. So I'm not saying it's easy, but yeah, I'm just, as I said, I'm just so grateful to my hearing aids and a very good hearing woman from Action for Deafness, who's really, really good when I go to see her.
Yeah, totally. And I can imagine that your hearing aids must, have been and still be to this day in such a massive assistance for you.
Yeah, I mean, they're fiddly though, because the batteries conk out, or they get plugged up with wax. There's lots of things that can go wrong. It's a bit like when an electrical gadget doesn't work, and you think, is it the plug? Is it the fuse? Is it the gadget? Is it, what is it? So I think there's a very slight advantage to partially losing your hearing when you're not too old, because you can sort things out properly yourself and work out what's the problem. Whereas a lot of elderly people, when they lose their hearing, they don't really know what's going on, what's going wrong, and their grown-up children, don't understand about the hearing aids and what the matter is, and so on. So I have to count my blessings. It's not a very great blessing, you know, I'd much rather have perfect hearing, but you know, it really doesn't bother me too much.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. So, what kind of stories do you like to read nowadays?
Um, I've always really been primarily a reader of fiction. I mean, I read some non-fiction, but if I'm reading in bed and it's non-fiction, I tend to drift off to sleep, you know. I mean, I I'd say, as far as one can generalize, I prefer stories either set in the present day or set at the time when the author was living. You know, if the author was a 19th century author, you know, stories set in the 19th century. I'm not so keen on when people try to write about a historical period, or you know, and then I feel they don't get it quite right. So at the moment, I've just started a book called Long Island by Colm Tobin, the Irish writer. He wrote Brooklyn, which I loved. He's a very good writer. You know, I like a good sort of thrillery book as well. Like I think Ruth Rendell is very, very good crime writer. So she's another favourite. You know, I think they just have to be well written. You know, not the subject matter could actually be almost anything, as long as I like the way the book's written. Some of the other people in my book group, they're not too fussy. I tend to be a bit more, I suppose, because I'm a writer myself, I'm a bit more critical perhaps about the writing style.
Yeah, yeah, I can definitely understand that, as you're a writer yourself. What would you say then has been your proudest moment so far?
Uh, well, this is going to probably sound a bit sentimental, but when the Gruffalo was shortlisted for a prize, which then was called the Smarties Prize, I knew about this prize because, you know, I'd seen these stickers on books, that I'd read to my children. And at that stage, I had a job, I was a writer in residence, and I was working in some primary schools. And when I went, this was in Scotland where we lived at the time. So when I went to London to the award ceremony, I said to a class of children, "Oh, I'm going. You know, I know I'm going to either get gold, silver, or bronze, award for this book, the Gruffalo." And I did get the gold award. And sort of when I came back, the children said, "Oh, wait, what did you get? Gold, silver, bronze?" And I said, "Gold." And they gave me this little this little sticky gold star, you know, to stick on something or other. And it was so touching in a way that meant more to me than the actual award itself.
Oh, I that is such a lovely sort of little like sentiment, and I can totally understand why that would mean a lot to you. So looking forward to the future then, do you have any sort of further aspirations or anything on your bucket list that you would still like to achieve?
I think most things have been ticked off really, but what tends to happen is more that I will respond to something I'm asked to do. So I don't know what that might be, but for instance, in the fairly recent past, um, I was asked if I would do a writing course, and I've done that. It's called Maestro. I don't know if you've come across that, but it's there's this whole series, BBC Maestro, and they get people to do courses in whatever it is. Like I think maybe Helena Bonham Carter might have done one about acting, and someone else has done one about cookery. And I did one. There's 27 lessons actually about writing children's picture books. So I was just approached, you know, would I like to do that? And it was a lot of work, and it was actually during the lockdown that I did it. So that's not something I'd have thought of myself, but it was a really challenging experience going in a different direction. And also during the lockdown, I had the idea of making weekly broadcasts. They were video broadcasts of each week. I'd act out a different story and get the illustrator to draw a picture. and we put those out every week. And again, that's something I just responded to the lockdown, thinking there are all these children at home. How can I help to entertain them? So who knows? Maybe there'll be something else that I haven't dreamt of that'll come along.
Yeah, definitely. I can totally see that. I mean, you mentioned that BBC Maestro course that you did. It was a very challenging experience because it was, in a bit of a different direction to what you'd done previously.
Mm.
Do you like to get out of your comfort zone? Do you think that's important to do?
It is actually because so often I do get asked the same questions, and obviously I know the answers, so I'm not kind of, well, I have in this interview I found out some new things which you've told me, but in a normal kind of interview, I'm there just saying stuff that I could say standing on my head and that I know the answer to. So like when I did the Maestro course, I got every publisher to send me what they considered to be their 5 best recent picture books, because I didn't just want to talk about my own books or just about the authors that my children had loved or my grandchildren loved. And so that was a bit like preparing a whole term's worth of university lectures or something. So that was quite stimulating. I mean, it was a little bit scary, but yeah, so it doesn't happen perhaps as often as it could. I would probably like a few more challenges. Although every new book is a challenge. Every time I write a new story, it's as if I've never written one before. I always think, oh, I can't do this anymore. How do you go about it? I haven't got a kind of set way of going about things.
Yeah, I can totally understand that. Sort of just like go with the flow and see what ideas come to you, that kind of thing.
Yes, and
Um,
also it's not just you can have an idea, a vague idea, but it's the hard part is developing that idea into a fully formed storyline. And I always do that in my head, and it sometimes can take months to do that before I write a word on a page, and I like to have the whole story in my head first.
yeah, 100%. You mentioned, getting writers and publishers to send you what they thought were their sort of
Mm.
5 best recent picture books. What would you say? I mean, do you have a favorite book that you've written, or do you have one that you think, yeah, I did really good there, or do you love them all equally?
Oh, thank you. No, that's a really nice question. I mean, in a sense, I love them all equally because they're all my children. But there are some that I feel are kind of my neglected masterpieces. And there's one quite recent one called The Bower Bird, which is illustrated by someone called Catherine Rayner. And it was inspired by David Attenborough, a television program about these birds that the male builds a nest or a bower to entice a female inside and places all these beautiful objects outside to try and lure her in. So that inspired this book, The Bowerbird, and it's a great one to act out as well. The bowers that we that we have on the stage are actually portable loo tents that spring up and to create the bowers with kind of camouflage netting. And I love that story. And yeah, I wish that one was better. I mean, it's done all right. It's doing all right, but I would like that one to have the success of something like Gruffalo or Room in the Broom.
Yeah, I can imagine that. I think when I mean, every book you produce is a success, but when you've produced so many, like almost world famous books, I can imagine that some almost almost blend into the background a
Yeah,
little bit more.
fall by the wayside. Yeah,
And I can imagine that some of those you probably wished would, be a little bit more well known.
yeah, that's true. But mustn't grumble because they're even. I mean, they're all in print, so that's unusual because I've been writing having books published for 30 years, and I think all the bookshop ones are still in print. Some of the educational ones are. I just remember I was asking you about your own writing and what I just wonder what you particularly like to write about.
Well, I mean, that is a very good question. I sort of write about all sorts of things really. Whenever I get the time, I like to write sort of, little stories with whatever idea may come to my head. I couldn't really tell you any of the stories I've wrote in specific. My memory's quite clogged up with other things at the minute because I've got mock exams next week. So I couldn't really tell you any of them in specific, but what I can tell you is I really, really enjoy writing, and
Mm,
it's something I do quite a lot.
mm,
And actually, one of our we've been doing English language at the minute, and one of the questions on paper 2 is descriptive writing, and I am in my element. It's great. I love it.
oh, great. Good. And I think you've got a very encouraging English teacher in your school as well.
Yeah, yeah, definitely. Yeah, I mean, all the I think teachers are incredible, with what they do, and I think they are just such incredible people that they want to, pass knowledge on to, the generations that they teach. I think it's just such an incredible profession. And yeah, the teachers in my school are brilliant. And so I think that really helps as well.
No, I agree with you. I think teachers are very underrated. As a profession, the teaching profession is very underrated because they have such power to influence, children's lives. Well, for better or usually for better, occasionally for worse. But like you, I've had some very inspiring teachers.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. And I think that can really help as well. If you get a teacher who is passionate about the subject that they teach, it can tend to make the students that they're teaching more interested in that subject.
Yes, and I feel that perhaps nowadays, I don't know what your teachers would say, but perhaps with the national curriculum and all the Ofsted inspections, maybe it's less possible for a teacher to really wax passionately about whatever it is they're mad about, crazy about, enthused about. Because I remember having such a good primary school teacher who, he loved, one thing he loved was heraldry, shields of different knights and things like that. And we all made our own shields and rubbed different colour plasticine to make them all shining. But we learned all the French words for, I don't know, we just learned miscellaneous facts through his passion for heraldry. But we all still somehow learned to spell and add up and do all the other things. But that teacher still almost every day I remember something that he taught us. But I wonder now with the very restrictive sort of curriculum and all the inspectors, if people be allowed to do that.
I don't know. I think that's a very good point. I wonder if yeah, I do wonder if maybe that is the case nowadays. I'm not entirely sure. Well, anyways, Julia, thank you so much for coming on the podcast today. I mean, you are such a phenomenal person. All the incredible things, that you've done in your life are absolutely amazing. And it has been such a pleasure to get to meet you. So thank you so much for giving up some of your time today to talk to me. It really does mean the world.
Well, thank you, Evie. I've really enjoyed speaking to you.
Oh, thank you. I'm so glad. And thank you to my audience for listening, and I will see you all next time.